This morning, we are going to hear from Claire Malcolm. Claire, do you want to just give us a wave? Claire's got a bit of a cold, but she's battened down the hatches, put the fire on, switched the lights on. Claire is the chief exec of New Writing North, which some of you will have heard of, perhaps lots of you will have heard of, based across in the northeast. I spotted a really interesting article that Claire wrote in Arts Professional about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, about how she'd taken her organisation on a journey, on a green journey. I won't say any more than that. Claire's going to talk a bit about that, and perhaps there's some resonance for people on this call who work in the sector to discuss there as well. And also we're going to hear from Sam, Kieran and David. Sam and Kieran, a lot of you will know, run We Are Here, the Arts Council Creative People and Places project in West Cumbria. It's been going for quite some time, 6 months, 9 months, can't remember, but it's really into its flow now, and really interesting and ambitious idea for a citizens' assembly coming up next year, so that people can actually decide how money is spent on culture and the arts in that part of the world. And David works for an organisation, I hope we've got this right, David, Citizens in Power, which I think is working with Sam and Kieran. So we're going to hear from those three to hear about their ambitions there and what a citizens' assembly actually is, and how it could be really interesting in this part of the world to make some good decisions. So that is the plan for this morning, if all goes. I've got a really lovely neighbour called Edward, who's building a bathroom. I live in a terraced house. Occasionally he's very noisy, but he's just come and fixed my boiler this morning already. So I love Edward, and I will forgive him any noise that he makes, and probably you won't hear it anyway, but if I'm vaguely mildly distracted, it'll be because Edward is banging on a wall next to me. Right, that is the plan for this morning. As ever, chat will probably get busy, but let's start with Claire. Claire, very welcome to the call this morning. Thank you for joining us and giving up some of your time. I'm just going to hand the floor over to you. I know we've got 1 or 2 slides we're going to share for you as well, which Amy will get up shortly. But if you'd just like to introduce yourself, Claire, and off you go.
Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be in a room with lots of people from Cumbria. And thank you for inviting me. It's great to get to talk about this kind of stuff, I think, because one of the things I found running the kind of organisation that I do is that a lot of the briefings and events I would go to around sustainability were very focused on people who ran buildings, and they were all about retrofitting and managing buildings, which of course is part of this story. But the organisation I run doesn't have a building. So I'll just say a little bit about what New Writing North is to explain that. So New Writing North has been around for 27 years, and we're the writing development agency for the north of England. So we have a base in Newcastle, and we work across the north, often through kind of network projects, running talent development programs for writers. In the northeast, we do a large program of work with young people and embedded work within communities. We run festivals and events like Durham Book Festival and some rather large literary prizes, including the Northern Writers Awards, Golden Burn Prize, and the David Cohen Lifetime Achievement Awards. So a real mixed portfolio of activity. And we work with a great deal of freelancers. I think last year we worked with about 300 freelance practitioners in some way. We work very closely with freelancers to deliver a lot of our work with communities and young people. And of course, with festivals and events, we're commissioning and making projects with people. But we also commission and have attached creative associates to the organisation. So we're really passionate about finding ways to make work as well and commission work. And that comes into play a bit with this. So we are quite an alert organisation in terms of the conversations that the team has about social justice and social affairs and the world. And we feel we have a responsibility in terms of the events and things we programme to be engaged with current dialogue and conversations. So it's not unusual to me that we would have tried to think about the climate emergency and sustainability in a different way. So I thought today I'll just tell you a little bit about what we've been doing since 2019. There are some slides here. They're a little bit dense, but I thought they might be useful for you to have access to afterwards, probably more than during. So I'm happy for whoever's in charge of the slides to just kind of roll through them while I talk. I'm not going to talk specifically to them, but you're very welcome afterwards to have them and to use them in any context that you might find useful. I've used these slides for doing some more kind of climate investigative work with organisations to help teams think through things, and also with the board I'm on of Northeast organisations to try and help us work out why we might choose this topic as a area to work around. There's some general stuff about why it's important. But it all really kicked off in an interesting way at New Writing North when lots of the young people that we worked with decided to go on the climate strike in 2019. I don't even remember the young people's climate strikes. And we had loads of work that was meant to be happening that day. And staff came to me and said, we think we should just go on the climate march with the young people and support them to do that. And that kicked off an office and a conversation in the office about how we should probably all just go on the climate march. So we all went on the climate march and, you know, felt very moved by all the young people. But then came back and went, well, we went on a march. What, like, you know, I'm sure we could do something a bit more than that. So it started a conversation about, as an organisation, what power we had, and as a group of individuals, what will we had to try and do something. So we moved towards a process with staff and our board of trustees where we decided to try and do some quite quick learning. So we focused on a book, because obviously we're a literature organisation, so we're very comfortable going to a book for information. But there's a book called The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells, who's a writer from The New Yorker. And this book came out a couple of years ago. I'm not sure how out of date some of the science might be by now, but it was basically looking at what the trajectory of heat and the planet was going to be. But interestingly, there's a whole chapter in that about storytelling that got us really thinking about what our role could be around helping people to think about climate change and sustainability. And there's it is a really interesting chapter to read because he talks a lot about dystopia and apocalyptic visions of the future and how Hollywood and certain forms of writing move very clearly towards that. And at the time, we'd never really heard, well, I hadn't heard the phrase climate hope or the idea that there might be a different way of thinking about change, but that you might have to really decide to do it differently. So with our board, we declared a climate emergency in 2019, which felt like a commitment to doing and a commitment then to having to do, because we'd said we would do that. So it wasn't an empty statement for us. And it still feels quite important sometimes to be saying that and standing behind those words. And from that, we decided to try and work out what the role of writers and organisations that are all about story and narrative could be, and also to think about all of the people we worked with or could reach and how we might have power to make change in those kind of networks. And that is still the journey we are on. Some of the things we have done along the way, we decided to appoint a climate writer in residence to help us think through some of this stuff, and to think about what the role of writers and storytelling could be. And we worked with a brilliant poet from Northumberland called Linda Franz, who had a long history of publication and of writing about nature and botanicals. And we'd worked on a nature project with her previously. And Newcastle University co-funded that project with us. And we were interested to try and also start to talk to scientists differently, to try and square this circle about how the climate crisis is communicated through science, through artists. And again, that work's ongoing, but we've opened out kind of some dialogue. And I think that's a really interesting space for all of us to be thinking about. Linda was with us for 2 years, and we managed to then leave her some Arts Council funding for her to continue her project. And during that time, she did things like mass collaboration poems. If you look on our website, there's a whole section devoted to her residency in the work. She made some amazing things, but we were interested in getting a lot of people. Again, what's our reach? Who can we engage in thinking about this, participating in things? And we continued some of that work during lockdown, where again, these issues and people's relationships to nature and place seemed to change in a positive way. We made a podcast series to coincide with COP that Linda attended, where she talked to scientists, writers, artists, and lots of different types of people, including young people, about how they thought about the future. And we got interested during that time in the idea of behaviour change, and that one of the main things we could potentially influence as creative makers was behaviour change. And around that time, I met a guy called Adam Cooper, who I'd known as an arts consultant for a number of years, but he had decided to set forth on the creation of a new organisation that was going to be a climate hope organisation that would use culture to promote climate hope. And he and I worked together quite a bit around the early stages of that, and I learned quite a lot from him, and I think was opened out to a slightly different way of thinking about behaviour change, and also what were the right kind of actions to be prioritising. So Adam would go, don't bother about your reusable cup. Think about the thousands of people you work with and how you can get them to vote differently, you know. So that's been quite challenging, quite interesting working with him. And he ended up becoming one of our creative associates, which was a project we were running to diversify how we worked with artists after the pandemic to offer more secure, longer term paid opportunities. But also we were trying to use the opportunity to hothouse new ideas or new projects. So Adam has just finished work with us, and he has created a new organisation called Threads in the Ground, which have a really interesting website where he's articulated quite a lot of things, which basically are the themes and the ways that we are working. So definitely worth a look. We also put all the staff team and some of our trustees through climate literacy training, because we found when we were doing work around anti-racism in our organisation that one of the main barriers to making progress was people being confident in language and knowing what they were talking about. So we had experienced how being able to have better conversations within the team enabled different things to happen within the organisation. So climate literacy training seemed a good way to go about that. It was quite a challenging process, and we're still working through the outcomes. And we worked with an organisation that I would really recommend called We Are Sale, which is a body that's grown out of Opera North, who have done quite a lot of work around this issue. And they offer they offer consultancy services, so you can buy them in to do climate literacy training, and you do basic training, and then you have to come up with an action plan that everyone in the organisation is buying into. We're working on that and still thinking about how to set the right kind of level of ambition for that. And it's around carbon usage, but also around other kinds of actions. So we're looking at both those things, but we're mainly, because our carbon usage isn't high, and because we work a lot, as I'm sure you guys do, in lots of rural areas where it's difficult to get there on public transport or impossible, there is a certain level of car usage and things like that that we have to do still. So we are making work. As I say, we've had Adam with us for a year, and we've helped that organisation to fledge, and we'll still collaborate with them. So at the moment, I'm working with Adam to try and structure a large-scale commissioning program, which would involve a handful of organisations in different places in the Northeast, working with different types of artists to create commissions that were all about sustainability and that were made with place-based kind of groupings of people in different ways. So again, we're just trying to use a creative act and a commissioning methodology to involve people and take people on a journey, while trying to talk to them about different things and maybe help them to think differently about certain things. Adam and I, with Linda, did a project a few weeks ago, which I thought was very interesting as well, and we may try and develop a little bit. We were asked by the Northumberland Cultural Network, who were having a meeting of all their partners and participants, to run a kind of thing, a day based on the climate. And we have all, as I'm sure you have been to lots of events where people do PowerPoints about the great work that they're doing around the climate, and you sit there and go, well, that looks great, but I don't run a forest, so limited adaptability for me. So we were wanted to try and do a day that was about creative thinking and creative programming, and to challenge people to think differently about how they set forth. So we created this challenge called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. And you won vegan bacon if you achieved the challenge, which was to think of a project that you have coming up. So we had a room full of really diverse organizations. We had museums, we had dance companies, we had gardens, we had heritage organizations in different ways, and individual artists and practitioners. And we got them to work in groups. So if you look on the Threads in the Ground website, Adam has like 5 points to think about when you're thinking about projects, and we use them to see if that would work for people planning projects. So we asked everyone to take a project that was coming up. So we had things like, I remember there was a woman from a museum who was like, World War II anniversary is coming up, we've got to do something about World War II. We had people who were doing quite place specific things. Somebody was doing a project about food. And working through these steps, they came up with ways to adapt those projects into projects that would have some kind of climate thinking outcome. So the people who were working on the World War II celebrations were like, oh, we're going to do Dig for Victory and talk about local food sustainability. So we'll use that as a theme. And we're thinking about make, do, and mend and circular economies, and how you might teach people mending and making skills with a different kind of intent. So the things that people were coming up with weren't like crazy offshoots of the kind of things they would have done, but they were coming at it with just a slightly different intention, and with an idea of a kind of slightly different outcome that might come out of some of that work, which I think is a really interesting way of thinking about some of this. And we're starting to try and do this now with New Writing North. So as we're evolving festival programs or thinking about the development of our prizes and awards, we're thinking all the time and challenging ourselves as to what the kind of climate thinking outcome could be around some of this work. So that's really where we're at on the journey. I don't hold us up as a perfect example of anything, nor is everything we do having a climate outcome. But I think when you work with communities and when you work with young people especially, these topics, this issue is already there in a really big way. And I think as a sector, we have a responsibility to not only listen to that, but to think about what our role is. And I think that's where I'm at the moment, is just a real interest in genuinely what is the reach and the power of the work that we do to contribute to this huge, too big to think about sometimes issue.
So it's about influencing others as much as anything else, and how New Writing North and your organisation can not necessarily pull levers, but just influence.
Yeah, and the power of, creative art to get people thinking differently. We know we can do that. We do that in lots of different ways. So it's about the just intent. Maybe there's a different intention we can have when we set about things.
Yeah,
we're doing a climate season, or this is a special climate project, but just kind of thinking about how that fits in. Just like now, hopefully we're all thinking about diversity and inclusion as a kind of thing right from the beginning.
If anyone's got any questions or observations, then just stick your hand up electronically or otherwise. And I suppose, is your organisation Arts Council funded, Claire? I'm kind of
Yeah, we are. Although interestingly, we have been trying to talk to the lead person at Arts Council for the investment principle, which is environmental sustainability, and I'm not getting very far. So if I was being very cynical, I would question actually how genuinely interested Arts Council are in this. And I'm not sure they're as far on as some organisations in understanding the making side of this. Again, it's a lot about retrofitting, and things like that. But I wonder sometimes quite how real that interest is. And I know some people who've tried to get project grants through that are really strong on this theme that have failed. And although things are very competitive at the moment, I just wonder how much of a priority this really is for them.
Did getting someone like Linda or Adam in from the outside, did you sort of feel you needed that injection of energy and fresh thinking to help give this momentum?
Yes, we did, because we're a busy team and we have a really big workload already. So having people who have the time, and the interest to think about this and then provoke us, or to bring ideas back and to challenge how we worked or how we did certain things, has been really helpful. It speeds up possibilities, I think.
And in the week that COP28 is kicking off in the middle of the desert in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, does this feel so again, just to get my take on, you're basically saying drip feed this stuff into sort of everything you do rather than do a big wham bam thank you ma'am climate project is the way forward.
And kind of bone up on your thinking as a team, if you have a team, or with your regular collaborators. I think there's an interesting we work with quite a lot of freelancers, and we have lots of regular freelancers, and we now offer training programs and open stuff we do to those freelancers. So I think, think about ways you can embrace all parts of the sector in terms of who you might think your team is.
Yeah.
Because your collaborators need to go on this journey as well, and are probably less likely to be able to access things like climate literacy training, or be in really good dialogue about how work might change. And some of the most interesting conversations I've had around this topic have been with independent practitioners, kind of, textile artists and dancers. They have a lot of really great ideas.
Amy asks, do you get any sense that the subject is so overwhelming that audiences don't want to engage with it?
This is why the climate hope thing, an idea, is important. And I think that's the thing to focus on, because climate anxiety with young people is a real thing, and for all of us. And this is it is hard to think of a subject this big and this terrifying outside of awful imagery, and I think even the things we're beginning to experience with floods and with weather events and things are now just all have a slightly different flavor to them. For me, they all feel like part of a bigger story, not just an exceptional event. So it is overwhelming, but what I've learned from Adam is it's about what's achievable within your range of power. So it's all about thinking about what you can actually do as an individual, and how also some of that stuff from maybe an organizational or a collaborative perspective can be about how we can draw people together in new ways to do bigger moments of change. Because if you look on the Threads in the Ground websites, there's great information about how many people in the world have to move on this issue to create real political change and action, and it's not as many as you might think. So the idea that we might have a bit of a role to play in shuffling people along through our stealth way of being able to communicate ideas to them, I think is quite exciting. That motivates me to feel like there is something you can do.
Yeah. Some bits in chat there about climate literacy training, carbon literacy training that goes on in Cumbria in a couple of organisations that people can find out a bit more about it. Claire, thanks ever so much for sharing that story with us. I think it's a long-term thing that we're all involved in now, and we need to think in the long-term way about it. But that doesn't mean to say we don't need to think what we can do now too. So thank you for sharing that. And it's a really interesting example of an organisation trying to do something and trying to influence, which I'm a massive believer that the arts and cultural sector can do. We may not be able to actually, change people, but we can get them to think differently, which can lead to change further down the line. Really good. And really, by the way, really good just to hear another northern voice from the northeast, as opposed to just Cumbria on this call as well. So thank you for sharing that, and do stick with us because we've got some more fascinating stuff coming up from the other side of the north, from West Cumbria. Claire's put some links in, by the way, in chat as well for other bits and bobs, the things she was talking about. So do look at those too. Right. So sort of shifting gears slightly, but not massively, because it's all about kind of what people are deciding is important to them and that matters to them. The idea of a citizens' assembly for West Cumbria under the guises of We Are Here. So Sam and Kieran and David, the floor is yours to tell us a bit more about this. And again, Amy's got your slides to share about some of the principles that you're following. So Sam, I'll hand to you first of all.
Great, thank you very much. Hi everyone, my name's Sam Hunt. I'm the co-director of the Creative People and Places for West Cumbria with Kieran Sheehan, who's also on the call. And we're joined by our colleague David Jubb, who's working with us on creating or setting up a new citizens' assembly, which we'll talk about in a second. But, you know, just thinking just what Claire was talking about then, there are some similarities, and there are some similarities in these sort of programs, which is how can we as a sector help, or at least help a sense of optimism, or enable a sense of optimism about the future in light of this sort of poly crisis that we're facing. You know, there's something that we can do, and I think we play a very important role in that. But I think in terms of a hyper local approach to that, Kieran and I have been in post with We Are Here since about March time, and we've been quite quiet because we've been developing a lot of things, and we're acutely aware that we've been quite quiet. So we want to talk about what we've been up to, the processes we've been following, and the plans we have for the future, and how hopefully there's ways for people to get involved. So Amy, do you want to throw up the slides and we'll just talk through what's been going on? Thank you so much. So We Are Here, which is one of two Creative People and Places projects, which is an Arts Council sort of live action research project designed to sort of develop all engagement in places of low engagement. There's another one in Barrow. We cover the areas formerly known as Copeland and Allerdale, and there's 5 key priorities within the Creative People and Places program. So engage more people. So the engage more in identified places in a wide range of arts and cultural experiences as audience or participants. Empower communities. This is Arts Council language, by the way, to lead and shape local cultural provision and ensure both engagement process and the creative and cultural experiences offered are relevant and excellent. Encourage partnership between publicly funded amateur, voluntary, communication and commercial sectors, and take an action research-led approach to this. So the idea being that this is research, this is experimental, these things have never really happened in these places before, but we're acutely aware that we're building on a long-standing process of people doing these sort of things in these places before. So what we've done is we've taken those aims and we've shaped it into sort of a mission, I suppose, for We Are Here. And we're kind of flying quite below the radar at the moment because we're going to come out in January with a new brand, a new business plan, a very public-facing element to the project. But I think it's really important to start seeding all of that with you guys as soon as possible. So we believe everyone in West Cumbria will have the opportunity to experience high-quality creative activities and experiences that are led crucially by local people. So the mission of We Are Here is to develop a citizens-led vision for creative activities and events in West Cumbria in partnership with local people. And we're going to do that through establishing and delivering a long-term citizen-led programme of creative activities, high-quality creative events, and increase West Cumbria attendance, and develop the diversity of people and processes delivering upon and deciding upon these events. And we'll get to that point in a second. We have done a few things this year. So Amy Story, who's on the call, has been involved in making some incredible work with us. We worked with artists from West Cumbria, Morgan Murray Arts, on 32 creative workshops over the summer, right across 4 very specific target areas. And that then created over 175 new pieces of work created with communities of West Cumbria. And I'll just put a link in the chat there. There's a film that Amy pulled together of that work, which is a really beautiful sort of essence of creativity from West Cumbria. So if you go to the next slide, Amy, that'd be great. So we've got 5 strands of specific work which we're following, which all coalesce into the Creative Citizens Assembly. and I'll explain how this goes. So the first strand, and Kieran and I will talk you through these processes, and this has already happened. I know Hannah Kessler was on this call the other week discussing this. So the first strand is place-based communities. We're really interested in very specific communities of interest. Now, these can be ethnographic, socio-economic, these can be physical geographies, and one of these communities of interest is Millom. And we're working with the All Kinds project in Millom to establish that place, I suppose, as the kindest town in the world, which I think it already is. But we're just going to celebrate the fact that it's the kindest town in the world, working with a group of artists and local connectors and establishing this whole series of workshops in there, which is this ongoing celebration of kindness. This is going to manifest itself in a few big moments. So we're working to set up a very special thing happening in February, where there'll be more about that coming soon. But all of this is planned to start seeding the idea of a new carnival for Millom, a big people-led, people-powered celebration of the spirit of place, and that's all being developed. And then there's a whole load of other projects which are currently being pulled together, which are very specifically around celebrating people and place within West Cumbria, and a lot of that's going to be coming online in the next few months. I'll hand over to Kieran for the next one. So, Amy.
Hello, I'm Kieran. So the second strand is focusing on queer communities, and what we're doing is working with a local artist, Lee Mattinson. Well, he's from Workington, and he is a scriptwriter, a playwright, works across TV, but also theatre, is an associate artist at Theatre by the Lake, and Louis Ingram, who's a director based in Newcastle. They've formed a new company called North Star, which is moving to Workington, and they're going to be based at the Carnegie. So we're sort of developing a really interesting piece of work with them called West Coast Makers. And it's at the recruitment stage, opening today. It's focusing on queer communities and allies aged between 16 and 21. And the idea is that a really kind of small company of between 20 to 30 people will be formed. And then every week throughout January through to May, middle of May, tying in with our first Citizens Assembly, this company will meet and have a space that is about creativity and expression and being supported to develop work together, but also separately. And essentially the project, the outcomes are really unknown. It's a very process-focused project, and one of the really important outputs is about gathering evidence for the Citizens Assembly to consider from this particular community in thinking about what the cultural offer is in West Cumbria and what it could be, and what the way of developing this cultural offer could be in collaboration with this community that's being formed. So it's really exciting. It's really it's a small impact in some way compared to other CPP projects, but we believe that the quality and relevance of the project is super exciting, and the expertise of the artists that are working on the project and the other artists that they're bringing in is also going to just lead, we believe, to lots of other projects for this community and the West Cumbrian community at large. So that's strand 2 at the moment. So Sam will talk about strand 3.
The Anton Deck of socially engaged practice. Here we go. So strand 3, again, along the lines of the strand 2, we're really interested in how certain groups, certain communities may not have been at the centre of sort of conversations around cultural provision or cultural policy, or being able to have a voice in how decisions are made. And so strand 3 is focusing on very particularly the disabled communities of West Cumbria, and we're working in a close collaboration with Prism Arts and Westlakes College on this. And we're developing a consultation process. And a lot of this work is about process and not necessarily the product at the end. And I think that's really important, because the process leads to this sort of the process of equitable decision making, which is what is at the core of the Citizens' Assembly. So at the moment, the process of this particular research is looking at a consultation for learning disabled and neurodiverse communities in West Cumbria, focusing very particularly on empowering learning disabled neurodiverse communities to lead and shape local cultural provision, and engage in a wide range of arts and cultural experiences, and develop participation. So talking to a whole range of artists about this, and a lot of this is artist-led as well, on a series of very specific interventions happening next year, which will begin the consultation, which will lead to the evidence which will be presented as part of the first Citizens' Assembly in May, ensuring that the voices of our neurodiverse and disabled communities are absolutely at the centre of the evidence being presented and the decisions being made on how money is spent on or invested on cultural provision in West Cumbria. So strand 4.
So this strand is essentially really focusing on this idea of the kind of action research element of CPP, so trying out and testing things that are led by communities. So one of the projects that we've supported at the moment is the Kind Futures project at Rose Hill. And the way that we're supporting that is that after the artists who are part of that programme have finished their training with unfinished business, then we support them to go and work with communities using the skills that they've developed and thought about over that time, to work alongside communities to co-create projects across West Cumbria. The other part of this strand is going to be led by a new role that we're going to be advertising next week. So it's a community producer role, and they will have a budget to go and really reach communities across West Cumbria that are perhaps more rural than places like Workington or Whitehaven, and establish relationships with people that are not currently having a massive engagement in the arts, to think about what it is that they might want to do. And the idea is that from these explorations and relationships that are built up with these people across West Cumbria, they then represent them at the Citizens' Assembly and say, look, we've been really exploring this interesting idea. This community really interested in building this project, and support the community as well to give evidence at Citizens' Assemblies. So that's the kind of the most experimental strand, I suppose, in terms of design, because we don't know what's going to be within that part of our work, because it's all going to be co-created with communities and for communities. Thank you.
And all of that comes together for a very particular process of deliberative democracy in a Citizens' Assembly. So we're working very closely with our friend and colleague David Jubb, who's online here, who will join in to talk through the process that is going to begin next week, actually, and lead on to this. So David, hand over to you just to talk about the process, and then it'd be good to take any questions.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Kieran. So my name is David. My background actually is in the cultural sector. I used to work at Battersea Arts Centre for about 20 years actually, but about 15 years as artistic director and CEO. So that background in the cultural sector, I guess, spurred my interest in Citizens' Assemblies, and I think what Kieran and Sam are trying to do is really interesting. So the plan, as Sam said, is that next week we're going to start some conversations with local people from around West Cumbria about the shape of the Citizens' Assembly. So just to be clear, I suppose, in terms of what a Citizens' Assembly is, because I think it's not to assume that there's a complete shared understanding of that. Essentially, a Citizens' Assembly has two kind of unique elements. Basically, it's about bringing people together, as Sam and Kieran have said, to make and lead decisions. So it's a citizen-led decision-making method. But the two key aspects of that method are, one is that there's a democratic lottery to decide who takes part. And that democratic lottery seeks to create a descriptively representative group from a particular area. There is a long and kind of detailed process, and those processes have become really sophisticated. Obviously, it's important to say that it's impossible to create a representative group. It's not actually achievable, but you can really strive to work to create something that is descriptively representative. And the second element of an assembly is that rather than the kind of usual debating methods, which we're used to in the House of Commons every week, and also in all of our mainstream media, the meaning of debate comes from the Latin word debattere, which means to batten down. So literally to kind of beat the other person and their argument down. The idea of deliberation is all about weighing something up as a whole. So Sam and Kieran have talked a lot about the evidence that would go forward to the Assembly. That's because in looking at an issue like creativity and culture and activities in West Cumbria, it's about bringing together a whole wide range of evidence on that topic and that issue for citizens to weigh up as a whole. So that means listening, it means using critical thinking, it means being aware of biases, and citizens who are part of assemblies get that sort of support and training as part of joining the Assembly. It's probably also worth saying that as part of the Assembly that people are paid and that also people's caring costs are paid for if they have them. If some of the Assembly is online, then there is support for broadband access, for devices, and even for training for people to be able to use those devices. So citizens' assemblies have over the last 2 or 3 decades become much more sophisticated in the way that they go about supporting people so that you can achieve as close to equity as you can in terms of participation. So the plan is to work. What we're not doing is just basically designing an assembly and then it landing like a spaceship in May. What we're very keen to do, and really to start that conversation today, is to open the process up of designing that assembly. So we're meeting with some local people next weekend, actually, to explore what the initial ideas are for the assembly. So what we are here are keen to use it for, what the remit of the assembly would be, but then to open that conversation out to local people to say, how could that assembly be most relevant to local people? So actually to get local people involved in the making of the thing. So actually when it happens, it's kind of got people's handprints on it. And we're really interested in what colleagues across the sector think about it. And whilst that won't be possible, I guess, in a short conversation today, we'd really be open, perhaps in January, if there are people on this call who would be interested to get a group together and to explore the kind of the nuts and bolts of what assemblies are and how we're thinking about designing this one and what it could achieve. The first assembly is happening in May, and that will, we hope, decide and set out the kind of creative programme for We Are Here for the year to come. But also I think it will inevitably open up broader conversations about culture in West Cumbria, about cultural policy, about what culture can achieve. And I think, promises to be a really interesting conversation. And as Kieran and Sam have said, it's very much then about really putting citizens in we are used to our cultural policy and our programs being very top down in the cultural sector. And at Battersea Arts Centre, it's something that we struggle with constantly, was just that sense of wanting as an organisation to listen to people and to work with people on the level that we met them, but that actually the structures, whether they be funding or political or cultural policy, were all kind of pushing often in a different direction. And so I think the idea of a citizens' assembly for culture is a really interesting idea of what happens if you upturn that. And actually all of those ideas come from people themselves, and you shape your programs and policy and potentially even funding from the ground up.
We've got 5 minutes, David and Sam
and
Kieran. So any questions on the floor? Practical question from me. How many people do you think might be in this assembly in your head? Roughly how many people might it be? And secondly, how will you actually make decisions?
So there'll be between 30 and 40 people on the assembly. In terms of the decision-making process, that's something that we're exploring as we sort of go to this design phase. So I'm sure David will talk more articulately than me, but there's lots of different sort of ways that we could approach that. And that's something we really want to get right, to make sure it's a proper ethical sort of transaction, and that we are genuinely giving power to the assembly.
In most assemblies, Tom, there's 3 basic stages. There's a learning stage where the assembly sort of learns skills, but also learns about the information in order that people can weigh up evidence as a whole. There's then a deliberating stage where citizens work in small groups and begin to reflect on the information they've heard, ask for further information, further deliberation, exploration, and then it comes to a deciding phase where citizens themselves put forward proposals of what those decisions should be. They word them, they frame them, they shape them, and then the citizens in the assembly actually start to vote on them in secret.
Okay.
In a secret ballot.
Stefan asks, how does the lottery selection process work for appointing the assembly?
So yeah, this is probably in 1 minute flat is going to be a bit tricky, but basically if you're looking for an assembly of about 40 people, you'd probably write to about 10 to 15,000 households across an area, a lot of people, and you would weight your invitations much more heavily to poorer or rural areas where you know you would get a lower response rate. You have already set out a kind of an ideal composition for the assembly. As people start to come back to you, either on a free phone number or on online, people will start to then give more information about themselves, and then you have a second lottery which matches those respondents to your original ambition. It's really important to recognise that some people don't have a letterbox, and some people wouldn't open anything that comes through their letterbox anyway. And so you have to think about, not just in terms of that initial democratic lottery, how people are contacted. And that might be door knocking, or it might be working with particular groups on the ground.
Zoe asks, how long does each assembly usually last? Kieran's just answered that. 2 to 3 days in May. These assemblies, are they in existence elsewhere in the UK?
Yeah, so citizens' assemblies have been used really extensively over the last 2 or 3 decades, a lot of them by local authorities with creating new climate plans. There's been various ones on transport, sort of a lot of localised issues, but also national governments have started to use them. Ireland is probably the forerunner in this. So in 2016, Ireland brought together a citizens' assembly on constitutional rights as a topic of abortion, which has been stuck for decades through political division and tribalism, and citizens recommended a change in the law on abortion, which was then put to a referendum, and the referendum voted in exactly the same proportion as did the assembly. It's really a way of opening up topics and discussions in a different way, as opposed to that kind of polarized model. Yeah.
It sounds fascinating to me, really interesting, a lot of work to get off the ground, and I can see, hence the seeds that you're beginning to sow now, with a more of a launch perhaps in the new year. So it might be really good to catch up again perhaps in a few months' time when this is further down the track, and certainly in May when the first assembly gets underway. I think people would find it really interesting. Sam, do you want to just sort of wrap up thoughts going forwards?
Yeah, no, absolutely. What we'd like to do is just come back and talk through the process as it goes. So we'll come back multiple times. The sortition process, which is how the letters going out and the building of the assembly, that begins in January. So that's going to we're going to be doing a lot of talking about this going forward. So all of our, we'll put our contact details in the chat, because it would be good for us to connect if you want to connect about this. But we'll make sure that we're coming back to do regular updates as this process goes forward, because it's critical that the sector within Cumbria is very involved in this, because it's completely interlinked in what everyone's doing here. So it could be a really valuable resource for people if we work together on it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great. Well, thank you, Sam, Kieran, and David, and good luck with your endeavours. Be watching with fascination how you get on over the next 6 months or so and beyond. Right, we've just got 5 minutes left. I just wanted to give Kate, who's the chair of the Cumbria Arts and Culture Network, a chance just to mention about some work that's gone on recently. So, Kate, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you so much. What a great presentation. I loved your images, as well as obviously what you're doing. It's really exciting, and if CACN can help in any way, shape or form, then please think to contact us, because that's what we're here for. Yeah, so I wanted to just mention the fact that earlier this week we ran our first fundraising hub in Kendal at the town hall, and that was open to anyone. It was free thanks to the funding that we have from arts fundraising and philanthropy. And it's sort of the next step in the support that we are giving for fundraising and fundraisers across the sector in Cumbria. The idea is really that we bring together anyone who is part of a fundraising team in an organisation or completely on their own as a creative practitioner trying to fundraise for the work that they do. So anyone involved in and interested in fundraising. So there were about 15 of us in Kendal, ranging from the development managers at the brewery and Lakeland Arts. In fact, it was led by Becca Muir, who is the head of development at Lakeland Arts. Plus a range of artists and practitioners and people from smaller organisations as well. And it was, as the first conversation, it was quite an open one about how can we help you to fundraise, to learn more about fundraising and bid writing. What is the work that we can do together to support you? And we came away with a long list of things that we could do. For example, a training session or a workshop about the funding landscape in Cumbria. What does that look like? How's it made up? Through to very basic sessions in what is bid writing? How can we help you? What are the different opportunities and so on. So we're going to be running those in different parts of the county, and we will come back to you with more information about the next one, but it was a really good start. And it really backs up the more formal training sessions that we have been doing around funding and will continue to do. Kieran, we had a conversation at the last quarterly meeting about how useful this kind of thing might be in the west of the county, and that is definitely something that we will come to you to talk about and kind of to complement and support what you're doing. This is absolutely not all about fundraising in big organisations. It's absolutely about the full range of people working across the sector. So please expect a phone call about that quite soon. I think that's it from me. Keep an eye on the events page on the website because there's lots more coming after Christmas. Lots more of the little sort of sector gatherings, whether you're interested in the spoken word or in visual arts. There's a rolling programme of work going on. Stefan, it looks like he's hiding, but there has been spoken word session this week, has there not?
Yes, we had another theatre and spoken word sectoral the other night, which was really well attended, and we had some lovely guest speakers, Jules Carter and Rachel Price, and also we just used the simple method of Zoom breakout rooms for just networking. There's so much blossoms from people getting to talk to each other on the network.
Fantastic, thank you so much for running that. Okay, Tom, thank you.
Thanks, Kate. I think we're there. Just a reminder that if you've ever got an idea or something you want to get out, the newsletter, which Amy pulls together every week, goes out to about 600 people. Is that about right, Amy? Of which probably about half of them open it, which is not bad. So, always get in contact, hello@cacn.co.uk if you want to get a message out or promote something or champion something or ask a question. That's a way to cut through to people. The Facebook group's got about 2,000 people in it, I think. And various other social media accounts as well. So you can always tag us and we'll share all that stuff around. And there's a recent podcast episode out that I've just done about Helping Hands Project as well. Went to the Armitt Museum and Ambleside, and also the Cumbria Opera Group when they were doing Don Giovanni down at Grange earlier this year, which was fascinating to talk to two young lads there who were volunteering through Helping Hands and therefore, adding their bit to the cultural and art sector landscape in Cumbria, who wouldn't have done it without Helping Hands, and also a chap who was helping at the Armitt, who'd come through the Helping Hands funnel as well. So have a listen to that if you fancy that. Thank you very much to Claire, to Sam, to Kieran, and to David for this morning, and to Kate too. Really interesting stuff. Next week, we're going to hear from a guy called Gordon Morrison, who's the CEO of the Association of Cultural Enterprise. So basically, he's the bloke that runs the umbrella organisation to help cultural institutions make money beyond just the entrance fees. He's a really interesting guy. And you know, his outlook is very much the landscape of cultural funding is going to change over the next 10, 20 years. We cannot ignore how to prize money out of people in different ways. And Steph Bias from Wordsworth Grasmere is also going to be joining us. They've just recently launched an online shop at Wordsworth Grasmere. And so we'll see how that's been getting on, and also what the thinking behind that was as well. So that's the plan for next week, when it will be December the 8th, and there'll be even less shopping days to go to Christmas. Thanks, everybody. Lovely to see you all. Enjoy the sunshine wherever you might be, and catch you again soon.